All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Well, folks, if you've been watching this edition of the NCAA tournament, then you had better get used to this format as right now, this tournament belongs to the power conferences, and it's more than likely going to be that way for the formidable future. So we're down to the Sweet 16 in the NCAA tournament, and only four conferences remain. The SEC got a record 14 bids into this NCAA tournament, and seven of those teams are still alive. Both the Big Ten and Big 12 have four, while Duke is the lone representative still alive for the ACC. No mid majors and no non power conferences are represented. They're all home right now. And there's only one double digit seed that's still alive, and that's 10th seeded Arkansas. So, how did we get here? It's probably going to be the $1 million question for this right now. First things first, look no further than the transfer portal and the power of the NILs. I say this because 2 years ago, we saw the Cinderella run by Florida Atlantic as they got to the Final Four. And after that season, the Owls lost their head coach, Dusty May, to Michigan. He coached there one more year, okay? But after that, Dusty May did go to Michigan. And of course, once he got there, he took center Vladislav Golden with him. Also from that team, guard Jonell Davis is now at Arkansas in the Sweet 16. And then, we're talking about Dusty May, his Michigan team's in the Sweet 16. And then Elijah Martin, also from that team, is now with Florida. They as well are in the Sweet 16. The smaller basketball programs are being destroyed before they can even get off the ground. I mean, one thing we know this typically when a smaller school has a run in the NCAA tournament, more than likely their head coach is going to get a bigger job. So it's very difficult to maintain that. But now it's not just the coaches leaving, it's also the players. And sometimes, even when the coaches do stay, the players are leaving as well because the smaller programs simply can't compete with the bigger programs when it comes down to the money and it comes down to the NIL. I'll tell you like this, for anybody who's a fan of the mid majors, enjoy Gonzaga. And the reason why I'm saying it is this: it's going to be a long time before we see a smaller basketball program rise up like Gonzaga did to become a national brand. I'm old enough to remember when Gonzaga made that run back in 1999, okay, and they got to the Elite Eight. And it was one of those where Gonzaga has gone from being the school that John Stockton came from to now, you know what? Everybody who follows college basketball knows who Gonzaga is. You expect them to make the NCAA tournament every single year. And it's gotten to the point where, you know what? Gonzaga's had multiple number one seeds. They got to the Final Four a couple of times, you name it. But it starts with Mark Few. And, Mark Few, no pun intended, is one of the few head coaches that would stay at a small program like that because typically after a run like that, like the head coach is looking to move up. His predecessor did at from Gonzaga. He went to Minnesota, Dan Monson, and of course it did not work out for him there. I mean, you just look at Sacred Heart and what happened today. Sacred Heart just won the Northeast Conference tournament. They got to the NCAA tournament, and they're going to be going to D3 after next season. And it's one of those where a lot of people don't focus on it as much. I get it, okay? But whenever there's realignment, it affects so many different teams, it affects so many different leagues. And you look at the Northeast Conference, which is where Sacred Heart is, as an example of that. 25 years ago, they were a 12-team league. And after next year, the schools that were in the Northeast Conference 25 years ago, I think only four of them are still going to be there. Okay, so it's a trickle down effect. We've seen the effect on the MAC. We've seen the effect on the Atlantic 10, you name it, right across the board, even the Missouri Valley Conference, okay, because it's a trickle down effect because the bigger conferences are trying to do what they can to survive after the power conferences go out there and take away from them. And then, of course, you know, if you're St. Francis, you're not going to be able to keep up with the big boys. And I think that right there is a harbinger of things to come. You're going to see more of the smaller schools to say, screw it, we're going to go D2, we're going to go D3. Okay. Will something be done about this? I doubt it because just like football, nobody's going to take the bull by the horns by this. Why? Because it's not affecting the biggest power brokers in the room. I don't think anybody will pay attention to it unless smaller conferences go away completely, unless it's like 30 or 40 schools that have said, you know what, we're dropping athletics, we're dropping basketball, we're going D2, we're going D3. If it got to that point, okay, I think people, at the top would say, hey, something needs to change. But just like I talked about with college football and all of the wildness there, it's the same with college basketball. They need a commissioner, but easier said than done getting 500 ADs, 500 school presidents to all be on the same page because I highly doubt that a school president or a school AD at a Clemson or a Texas, is really going to be concerned with the well-being at a Drake or an Iona, just to throw it out there. Okay. It's unfortunate, but it's the nature of the beast. You think about the NCAA tournament, and honestly, the upsets are what have helped to make the NCAA tournament what it is. And usually, the biggest upsets are on Thursday and Friday in rounds number one, or the first round, rather. It's one of those where, yeah, we did see some upsets this year. You saw a couple of 12s knockout fives. McNeese State beat Clemson. And then, of course, Colorado State beat Memphis. Personally, I don't consider those upsets. Why? Because we get a five, at least one five losing to a 12 every year. It's the same thing with a 10 going over a seven and, an 11 going over a six. I really don't consider those upsets. In my opinion, the upsets are like, okay, if you got a four losing to a 13, a three losing to a 14, a two losing to a 15, especially a one losing to a 16, those definitely are categorized as upsets. So you can say it was more like pedestrian like from that aspect, but I still think we get a good quality we have gotten a good quality tournament so far, and I think we're still in store for a good final four rounds of this tournament as well. Heel, what's going on? Good evening to you, my brother, and I hope everything is well. Happy Wednesday to you. You look at this right now. The top four seeds in each region survived round one. And right now, all the number ones are still alive. St. John's is the only two seed that is home. They fell to Arkansas on Saturday. We lost a pair of threes, okay, in round number two. Iowa State, they got handled by six seeded Ole Miss. And then, of course, BYU beat Wisconsin. And it's one of those, for me, in my opinion, I don't consider the six going past the three an upset either. Okay. So it's one of those, we've got two threes home, we've got a two home, and we got 1-4 home as Texas A&M lost to Michigan 4-5 game. That's always a toss up, okay? But nonetheless, you look at the way that things are working out right now um, in this NCAA tournament. You got a 1-5, 2-6 still alive in the South. You've got a 1-4, 3-10 alive in the West. You've got a 1-4, 2-6 in the East, and then you got a 1-2-3-4 in the Midwest. Is this a harbinger of things to come for this NCAA tournament? More than likely. I'm not going to sit up here and completely write off Cinderella runs like we saw from George Mason in 2006. How we saw Butler get to back-to-back NCAA championship games out of the Horizon League, or like how we saw Florida Atlantic a couple of years ago, or even it's probably like 12 years ago, I do believe, Florida Gulf Coast as a 15 seed got all the way to the Elite Eight. And then a couple of years ago, we saw St. Peter's as a 15 get all the way to the Elite Eight as well. Oh, pardon me. I think Florida Gulf Coast got to the Sweet 16. St. Peter's was a 15 seed that got to the Elite Eight. I'm not saying that it still can't happen, but I'm going to say the possibilities of it are going to shrink because, right now you've got kids who are moving up each and every year to a bigger program through the transfer portal. And on top of that, it's one of those where the freshmen are being a little bit overlooked more. Just the high school seniors and the incoming freshmen, they're being overlooked a little bit more because some of these coaches are looking for more of a finished product. And of course, if you're playing at a lower tier school and then somebody's got the opportunity to come up there and bump you up, you get that NIL money. Hey, you know what? You're going for it. Hill, you're saying I'm unfamiliar with the NIL. Do bigger schools offer more money? Absolutely, because they've got bigger budgets to deal with. You think about it. I mean, the Big Ten and the SEC, as an example, they basically, if you want to say it, they got an unlimited war chest from all of their TV money, the endowments. On top of that, a litany of boosters and alumni with deep pockets, as it's all legal now. And it's one of those where it's a scenario where the smaller guys, they're not going to keep up with that. They simply aren't. They can offer stuff, yes, but it's going to come down to comfort and how much does that kid want to be there, as opposed to maybe taking a bigger, slice of the pie, if you will, at a bigger program. But nonetheless, like I said, it's a harbinger of things to come. I think we can still see the Cinderellas, but it's going to be fewer and far between that we're going to see those scenarios. It's going to be interesting again because just like it was with the college football playoff hadn't even started, and the transfer portal for football had opened up. And I thought it was a joke because, I mean, a school like Penn State, for an example, they lost their backup quarterback who they actually had packages for, and he didn't even play for them in the playoff. And like right now, the portal just opened up yesterday. And what about the schools that are still in the NCAA tournament? And the NCAA tournament is not just the only postseason tournament going on right now in college basketball. You got the NIT, you got the CIT, the CBI, and of course the college basketball crown. So it's like, if you're going to do this and you're going to open up the portal, open it up for everybody at the same doggone time. That's just my opinion on it. You're saying so the system is very similar to soccer, where the big teams hoard all the great talent under the age of 18. Bingo. It's one of those where, and I talked about this with college football, you're treating these kids as professionals. I got no beef with that because we need to eliminate the term student athlete. That term died a long time ago. All right. But nonetheless, if you're going to treat them like professionals, you need more professional structure. This is why you got revenue sharing at the pro levels. This is why some of these leagues have salary caps, this, that, and the third, because it gives an opportunity for everybody to somewhat be on the same level. And if you don't have that structure, guess what? The rails are going to fall off of this thing at some point. At the end of the day, college basketball is still going to continue to be a cash cow. It's not the cash cows that football is. I totally get it, but they're no slouch either. But unfortunately, we're just going to continue to see the gap grow between the haves and the have-nots. This is why you have topics out there and people questioning whether or not the Big East and the ACC should merge. You have questions as far as like how are certain leagues and certain schools and certain programs going to be able to keep up. This is why, because even if a smaller school is able to make a run, you know, more than likely, they're losing their kids. I mean, you look at Colorado State. They just lost their head coach in Minnesota. I guarantee you some of those players are leaving. New Mexico, Richard Pitino, he just took the Villanova job. I'm not surprised by that. He's going to be back in the Big East with his dad, who's at St. John's. And more than likely, he's going to take some of those kids from New Mexico there. And you think about it, one of the top players that he's going to bring with him more than likely was the Mountain West Player of the Year. And New Mexico has lost a couple of quality coaches over the last several years in situations like that. Remember, Steve Alford at one point made a had New Mexico as a top 25 caliber team. So it's just the unfortunate nature of the beast. You're saying smaller soccer teams compete by having great scouting, so some Cinderella stories can still happen, maybe. Well, I'll give you an example. It's kind of like, you know, from another professional sports league, baseball, Major League Baseball, as an example. Okay, they do have the luxury tax, yes, but it's one of those where some of the smaller market teams rely on their system. This is where like the sabermetrics and things really came into play. And they rely on developing talent, a la, the Milwaukee Brewers, the Tampa Bay Rays, the once Oakland A's. Now I know they're just calling themselves the Athletics right now, whatever. Anyway, these guys have relied on the system of developing people in order to stay afloat. And I think that's something that the smaller guys are going to have to do. But the biggest difference is when you develop those kids at the soccer level, at the baseball level, you've got them under contract. Now in college basketball, these kids can play for you this year, and while they're playing for you, you've got people whispering in their ears about going to other schools. And then as soon as the season's over, they're out of town on the first thing smoking. And I think I think at some point, sooner rather than later, these kids are going to be signing contracts to stay at schools. Okay, and it's going to be attached with the NIL, so you're not going to see the jumping around as much. And I think if that does happen, and I expect it to at some point, it will have some form of an impact on college basketball, college football, and other sports at the collegiate level. But nonetheless, me personally, I think this has still been an exciting tournament because we've seen quality basketball and we're going to see more quality basketball this weekend. If you're a fan of college basketball, I think you're in store for some tremendous action in the round of 16 and the round of 8. You're saying like 4-year deals. Yeah, absolutely. Because I think it's going to be one of those things where it's going to get to the point if schools are going to commit money to these kids, they're going to want to put something in writing so that they can't jump ship because it's one of those where just throwing a number out there. Let's say a school offers a kid $150,000 and he agrees to it and NIL plays that year, shows tremendous skill. Somebody turns around and says, "You know what? We're going to give you 750 next year." And he has an opportunity to bolt before that, but before the schools that he's playing for even has a chance to even match what he was offered, or even possibly offer him more. And in some cases, some of these schools aren't able to offer him more than that. So that's where we're getting to with that point. But nonetheless, I mean, this weekend, I think we're in store for some quality action, and we've seen some quality action so far. You look at it. You look at the East. You got Duke and Arizona, BYU and Alabama. In the Midwest, and the Midwest is very intriguing for me because I'm looking at this bracket, and it's in Indianapolis. You've got Houston against Purdue and Kentucky and Tennessee, and Houston is the top seed in the Midwest, but they're basically if Houston gets out of this region, they're going to earn it because they're going to be playing 2 road games this weekend in Indianapolis. I mean, you figure you're playing Purdue. That's a hop, skip, and a jump from West Lafayette, and if you get past them, you got to take on Kentucky or Tennessee, and both of those states are right there by Indiana. And of course, the folks in the bluegrass state of Kentucky, and of course, the folks in the Smoky Mountain region of Tennessee, they travel. All right, and then on top of that, we're looking at the we talked about the Midwest. I talked about the East. You're looking at the West with Florida and Maryland. That should be a very intriguing game right there. And then also you've got Texas Tech, Arkansas, and then going to the South in Atlanta. It's basically the Big Ten SEC Challenge, and I think this is a harbinger of things to come, just like college football. But nonetheless, you've got Auburn, Michigan, and you've got Ole Miss and Michigan State. And you look at that Michigan team; They've succeeded in the transfer portal with the NILs. The same thing can be said for Auburn. Okay, so it's a harbinger of things to come. It's the new wave of the NCAA tournament. It's the new wave of collegiate athletics. Why? Because some of these coaches at the bigger schools, so much pressure is put on them to go in there and win, and hit the ground running and win from day one. You look at Kentucky with Mark Pope. A lot of kids left last year when John Calipari, left to go to Arkansas, which was understood. Mark Pope hit the transfer portal hard. That's why Kentucky is where they're at right now. You look at Michigan and how they've hit the transfer portal. You look at Auburn with John A. Broome. Okay. And now you're talking about a kid who's probably going to be a top five pick in the NBA draft this June. All right. So the pressure that's on these coaches at these big time football schools to go out there and produce, and they've got the budgets for it. Of course, they're going to go out there and hit the transfer portal. And basically, the mid majors have now become the G League, if you will, of college basketball. So at the end of the day, it's the unfortunate nature of the beast. It's the business aspect of it. And like I said, just like football, this is what happens when you don't have the leadership in place. Until somebody at the collegiate level for both football and basketball decide to take the bull by the horns on this thing, it's going to continue to spiral out of control. And at the end of the day, you really can't blame the players, because guess what? These coaches can bounce whenever they want. Okay, we heard the rumors about Will Wade leaving to go to NC State before McNeese State even took the court for their opening round game against Clemson. And to McNeese State's credit, they were ready, and Will Wade did have his team prepped to win. You heard about Villanova going out there, and Will Wade basically threw it out there. Hey, they're trying to get a coach, to come to them that's still in the NCAA tournament. That was Richard Pitino at New Mexico. Okay, we saw with Ryan Odom did at VCU, and now he's at Virginia. So it's one of those where the coaches are always looking for the bigger payday. Players got to look for it too. But at the end of the day, you just simply need more balance. You need more structure to this thing. NCAA tournament, just like the college football playoff, one of the best things going. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And I think, regardless, I still think the NCAA tournament is going to continue to be exciting. I do believe there will be some upsets, but it's not going to be as drastic as what we've seen with the 15s getting over the twos in recent years, or the threes losing to a 14, unless somebody really, and I mean really, has themselves a bad day. But nonetheless, this is what it's all about. Just like the college football playoff belongs to the SEC and the Big Ten, the same can be said right now for the NCAA tournament, as it's basically the SEC. Well, it is. Not basically, it is. It's the SEC, it's the Big Ten, it's the ACC, and the Big 12. Okay. That's it. Plus, with realignment, all of these teams, switching around. Some of these teams were in the Pac-12 last year. Some of these teams were in the American a couple of years ago. It's just the nature of the beast. But nonetheless, tournament's still going to be exciting. But I don't see Cinderella dancing as much as she had in the past. But folks, that's going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank each and every one of you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. And I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel, as well as liking this podcast. Also, fine folks, if you're out there on the X, which is formerly known as Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'd be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. And you can check that out. Drop a line and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. Heal, my brother, as always, definitely appreciate the support. Keep chiming in, man, because I got a lot to talk about as far as a stretch run in the NBA. And before we blink, we're going to be talking about the start of the NBA playoffs. But until next time, my name is William Martin. I'm signing off, and I'm saying thanks once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.